Hey everybody, it's Carter Froelich. And our mission at Launch Development Finance Advisors is to be a hero to the land development and home building community. We do that through a lot of different ways, but one of the ways that I want to give back to the industry is to be able to share our experience as well as the experience of a myriad of different players in our industry, their experience, what they've learned, what they're doing, and just the knowledge that they have to provide to the industry. With that having been said, I hope you enjoy this episode. And if there's anything that we can do at launch to help you finance infrastructure, reduce costs, mitigate risk, all with the goal of enhancing project profitability and returns, please give us a call at the contact information in the show notes.
Welcome to the Land to Lots podcast, powered by Launch Development Finance Advisors. And now your host, Carter Froelich.
Hello, everybody. It's Carter Froelich, and welcome to the Land to Lots podcast. And today I have the distinct pleasure of speaking with one of my development idols, and that is Robert Davis. Robert is the developer of the most iconic development in the United States, and that's my opinion, called Seaside, Florida. It's a landmark community on the Florida Panhandle, and it has become the most influential example of new urbanism in the country. Robert, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining. I'm so excited to get into our interview today.
Thanks, Carter. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah. And Robert, before we get started, and for some of those that of our listeners that may not know you or your background, could you give our listeners a brief description, a little background story of you and how you became a developer of Seaside, Florida?
Yeah. Well, I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, and
Mhm.
in my childhood, I was a free-range kid. As soon as I could ride a bicycle and find my way home, I was basically responsible for being home by 6 o'clock for dinner.
Yeah.
Otherwise, after school, I rode my bicycle to scouts or stayed at school for sports or just went over to the drugstore and had a milkshake or whatever it was I felt like doing or whatever was on schedule, and then got myself home. We had, a neighborhood full of kids
Yeah.
who used our very steeply sloping backyards that weren't fenced as football practice. Of course, it was not exactly the ideal terrain. But anyway, this is all that way of saying I grew up in a neighborhood which is typical for people of a certain age, uh, many of whom aren't with us anymore, and watched with some dismay the evolution of American culture and land use as it began to separate us more and more
Mhm.
precisely into demographic segments of
Yeah.
income that was very narrowly designated. There's a wonderful book called Our Town uh, by the same guy who wrote Bowling Alone. Our Kids, I'm
Mhm.
sorry. And
Mhm.
Our Kids is basically about how we lost this uh, way of having the entire village raise
Yeah. Yeah.
every individual child. I went to a wonderful boarding school my last 2 years of high school called the Barlow School, and it was a kind of outpost of Choate. Our
Oh,
headmaster
yeah.
was the uh, son of the kind of founding or establishing headmaster of Choate, Mr. St. John, and all of his brothers were headmasters. It was a family business. And the old man would come, he had retired from being headmaster of Choate, but he would come and do chapel service once or twice a month. And his service was basically a variation on a theme of noblesse oblige. You kids are the recipients of the Lucky Sperm Award. You did nothing to deserve
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
where you are or what your life is going to be like,
Yeah.
and you owe something back.
Hmm.
Uh, I went from there to Antioch College against my family's wishes. They wanted me to go to Harvard. And but my headmaster stood up for me because he
Yeah,
knew that I had taken this noblesse oblige idea to heart and wanted to go to a place where social justice was of primary concern to a lot of students and faculty,
yeah.
including some right wingers whom I befriended there. I was briefly a member of the Socialist Workers' Party, but have since
We'll
become a
dive down that one later. Yeah, yeah,
have since become a true believing capitalist, but one that recognizes that there is a role for government and there is a
hmm
role for this idea of social responsibility for
yeah,
capitalist enterprises anyway. Antioch had a famous former president who'd been president there in the late 1800s, Horace Mann, who famously said, "Be ashamed to die before you've won some victory for humanity." So
wow.
that was a variation on noblesse oblige.
Yeah, yeah,
And then from there, I went to the Harvard Business School.
yeah,
And basically, looking back at what they taught us how to be CEOs of multinationals. So they did almost nothing specifically to train me for being a real estate developer.
yeah,
They've subsequently begun grudgingly to accept that real estate development is a legitimate occupation, is not
yeah.
3 steps lower on the social hierarchy than used car salesman, card
And,
shark.
yeah, I think they have an MRAD program at Harvard, and
Right.
I know their head who started at USC, but I digress. Sorry, Robert. Yeah,
Yeah. Well, I was happy when MIT was one of the first to create a real estate program, and I was an
Mhm.
early lecturer there. And thrilled that they were doing it. I do think that the more recent additions to this uh, impetus to actually train real estate developers as professionals is being
Mhm.
done at University of Miami, where I was
Yeah,
involved in their
yeah,
program, and hopefully at Notre Dame, where uh, I'm trying to be more involved in the Fitzgerald Institute for Real Estate, which is,
hmm
I think, potentially a great program in its embryonic beginnings. But basically, what Harvard Business School taught me was how to make decisions with inadequate information, which
yeah,
is basically true of life. I mean,
yeah, yeah,
you never have enough information.
yeah. Exactly. Oh,
So,
that's great.
it was just one case after another, and you were called on if you were unlucky, or if you were lucky and you'd actually read the case, you were called on to say, if you were the CEO of this corporation, what would you do given what you know?
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, I went from there to teach in a predominantly Black school in the South. This was a Woodrow Wilson Foundation program. Uh, President Wilson is now held in low repute by progressives, but he did some wonderful things in education as president of
Mhm.
Princeton and in international relations. So I think as we begin to revive the reputations of some of these people,
Yeah,
he may yet come back. But they Princeton changed the name of their Wilson School for International
yeah.
Relations. At any rate, the Wilson Foundation had been sending academics to the South to teach in Black colleges, historically African American colleges, and I was one of the 6 first-generation administrative interns because they were getting feedback that these colleges could really use some help. Well, I have to say that as a budding CEO of a multinational, I had no idea how to help the financial aid officer who had receivables of somewhere like 300% of the total number of loans that he had. But it was an interesting time for me. I learned a lot. I got to teach history, which was, I think, a far more
Hmm.
valuable use of my time than trying to be a would-be administrator. And
Hmm.
then I went to Meet the Bushes in Miami because I thought that was a place where a lot of real estate development was being done, and found a job with a couple of youngish guys who had founded a company to build low-income housing, mainly public housing, Section 8.
Hmm.
Uh, they had recently been bought by Alcoa,
Hmm.
and they had wanted to expand with their newfound deep coffers. And they sent me to Washington to learn about the FHA 236 program. So the Federal Housing Administration under George Romney had created a special category to subsidize what they
Uh-huh.
called Operation Breakthrough projects. And this was going to apply the genius of American manufacturing, General Motors and GE and
Yeah.
American Motors, which Romney had run, to the production of housing, thinking that making the housing cheaper would actually be a way of addressing the affordability crisis, which was already a crisis by the early 70s when I
Yeah.
joined Housing Corporate America. As it turned out, it was uh, not a great idea
Yeah.
because, well, what I learned fairly quickly was in order to build houses in factories, you really need a lot of production near the site. You can't afford to ship large boxes like houses
Yeah.
very far. So even the mobile home industry is very decentralized in terms of where these
Yeah.
things get made. And of course, it's much easier to move a 12-foot wide box down a highway than to move six or eight 12-foot wide boxes and then glue them together,
Yeah.
nail them together to make housing. Uh, the other thing that I learned, though, which is probably more critical to what I'm doing, is that the subsidizing of wealthy investors in order to create low-income housing projects, which is what FHA 236 was doing. It was giving prioritized low-risk loans to equity investors who were basically in it for the tax write-off.
Hmm.
And it was costing roughly 30 to 40% more than stick-built housing would cost because of FHA minimum property standards.
Hmm.
Uh, and then the subsidies cost an additional 10 or 20% on top of that. So my idealistic notion that I was going to be helping solve the affordability problem for poor people turned out, as in my analysis, to kind of be a dumb idea. I had plenty of time on the commuter flight between Miami and Washington
Yeah.
where I was going to learn about the
To
program
pencil that out. Yeah.
and lobby the people in HUD, in the labyrinth of HUD, to give us an allocation of these funds. I spent a fair amount of time with my pocket calculator
Yeah.
and remember those,
Yeah. I
just
remember. Yeah.
crunching these numbers and saying, "Oh my goodness, why am I doing this?"
I don't know if you can
Anyway,
see this, but here's my HP. I still got one.
still have one. That's great.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's probably more information than
Well,
you.
it's really informative on some of the things we're going to be talking about, and as it relates to Seaside and some of the initiatives and your greater vision that at least in my opinion you're bringing or you have brought to Seaside. So let's start uh, uh, going back a little bit. It's my understanding that your grandfather acquired the land that would become Seaside sometime after the war. Is that
Yeah,
true? And
not
and then how did that all come together? So you have this background. Your grandfather has land. Why don't you pick up the story from then as to how Seaside started to germinate in your mind?
well, my grandfather was a merchant, not a land developer.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
though I think he was a frustrated architect and builder because he was always building stuff onto his house. And he loved laying block and digging holes in the yard and just he would dig holes as exercise and fill them back up.
Yeah.
But he just loved building. So I got that from him. But he bought this land to build a summer camp for the employees of the Pizzit store, which he had a 49% partnership in by the time he bought this land.
Hmm.
It's a long story about why it wasn't 50-50, but
Hmm.
his new partner was not his father-in-law, but his brother-in-law.
Hmm.
And his brother-in-law, my great uncle, thought this was really a dumb idea. He was a much more conservative guy. And he thought, well, you paid $100 an acre for this worthless piece of sand. He and I used to joke about this later
Yeah.
on when Seaside was well underway and he was still alive. And he said, I could have had that half of your deal for $4,000. Think of how much richer I'd be if
Yeah.
I'd
Yeah.
done that. Anyway, uh, he convinced my grandfather just to take the deed and put it in a safe deposit box and not worry much about it because he could afford the whole $8,000 investment. But he had the land cleared in, I think it was 1948 or 49, shortly after he bought it, so that on our annual pilgrimage to the beach, 10, 15 miles east of Seaside, he would always get in the car and pile all of us in the car and take us out to see the property.
Uh-huh.
And he would gesticulate and say, someday this is going to be something great. I don't know
Uh,
what.
that is so cool. So when did you start and how did you come in to s- begin the development of Seaside? Your grandfather had the property. How did it transition over to you, or did you get an interest in it? And then when did as you're walking that site, as you had done for so many years as a child, did the idea start to germinate that I could make this a special place?
Well, I was thinking about developing it from the probably early 70s onward. And
Hmm.
when I became a real estate developer, uh, also was involved in helping my grandparents do estate planning. And so I was in a good position to suggest to them that instead of inheriting shares in the family business, I'd like to inherit this piece of land.
Hmm.
So we tried to even it up. And as it turned out, the family business was sold within the lifetime of my grandmother. So my sisters and cousin ended up with about as much money as Seaside was worth, a little bit more than what Seaside
Uh-huh.
was worth when we started the development. I had thought about when I was at the Harvard Business School, I actually applied to the Yale Architecture School and got in and went to New Haven and found an apartment. And then I read somewhere that the draft boards were cutting back on student deferments.
Hmm.
So I
Yeah, yeah,
looked
yeah.
into that a little bit more and decided that I better do something else. And that's how I took this job working in this African, historically black college in the South, and it was you could get a teaching deferment. So I
Yeah.
did that, and then went to Antioch College for a while, and
Yeah.
then ended up going to Miami. But so I thought about this place for quite a while, and as I started going back there as a young adult, what I really thought about most was my childhood memories of being at the beach.
Hmm.
So we would stay in very simple wood frame cottages with big porches and outdoor showers, and they were always across the street from the beach because where we stayed had a very narrow strip of beach, and we would spend a lot of time on the porch because these places weren't air conditioning back then.
Yeah.
In the dark ages, air conditioning was for department stores and movie theaters.
Yeah.
And so the kids got to sleep on the porch, but we stayed up late listening to parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles telling stories to each other, and kind of getting the family history
Yeah.
that way. My family were particularly adept at storytelling. My mother and grandmother had both gone to Radcliffe and studied theater.
Oh, wow.
And
Wow. Yeah.
so they were really good. So, we kids were mesmerized because they were good storytellers. And mainly, I think even if the adults in your life don't have that kind of training as storytellers, for kids, it's wonderful to see adults letting their hair down,
Yeah.
relaxed, being more like children themselves. So they
Yeah.
adopt this kind of childlike playfulness. I remember being with my uncle flying kites. He bought these Steiff kites. He had grown up in Germany, so he loved German stuff. And
Uh-huh.
he bought
Uh-huh.
these beautiful, huge kites that we would fly on the beach. And,
Yeah.
seeing him not in a business suit, but in a bathing suit, uh, running down the beach with his kite was just thrilling.
That's neat. What a memory. And so what was the development process, and how did you run into Andreas Duani and Elizabeth Platter-Zyberk, DPZ? Had you known them as part of, being involved in Miami, and you ran across them, or how did they come in to assist you in the development of Seaside, Robert?
Well, I had done some pretty interesting small projects, 9 and 10 unit
Hmm.
townhouse projects in Miami. One of them was being published by House Beautiful, and the then editor of House Beautiful, Susan Lewin, came to Miami to oversee the photography and interview me about the project. And while she was there, she was scouting new things in South Florida to cover for future issues. And she found this group of young architects. It was Liz and Andreas and Bernardo and Lorinda Fort Brescia, and Lorinda Spear and Bernardo Fort Brescia, and Herman Romney.
Hmm.
Herman was the only one with a license to practice architecture. They were all fresh out of school. Yeah. And they founded this uh, firm called Architectonica, which later became famous for the Miami Vice building with a big hole in it
Oh
that
yeah, yeah,
opened in
yeah.
Paris for Miami Vice. So they were doing a lot of very stylish uh, modernist buildings. Uh, and I found them very interesting. They were you know, very attractive, very interesting folks to talk to. I ended up trying to explain to them what I had in mind, which really had very little to do with what they were doing in Miami. And it turned out that of the five partners, Liz and Andreas were the ones that had the strongest interest in traditional architecture and
Yeah.
in site planning. And they had gotten this from their days at Yale as graduate students in the architecture school, and mainly from Vincent Scully, whom I met years later, who was very much interested in shingle style architecture, Victorian architecture.
Yeah.
They would walk around New Haven just looking at stuff that architects couldn't see. They've been trained in school not to see these Victorians because they were so out of date and
Yeah.
old
Yeah.
fashioned. But anyway, so I latched on to Liz and Andreas, and we did a series of plans. The initial plans that show up in Diru's book, Views of Seaside or Visions of Seaside, are kind of diagrammatic.
Yeah.
At that point, you couldn't really do traditional architecture without stripping it down and using irony in the language that you were trying to revive. And I kept saying, no, let's just do it straight. Let's study these old beach shacks and old houses in small towns throughout the Southeast
Yeah.
and try to reverse engineer their DNA, their
Yeah.
essential qualities. And so that led to a series of road trips that we later came to designate travels by land yacht. Because,
And what was the land yacht? What was a big old
well,
Cadillac convertible? Or
it was a Pontiac convertible. I couldn't afford a
oh,
Cadillac
there.
back then. So it was this very long red Pontiac that uh, was at its best at about 45 miles an hour. Any faster, and it was lethal. It had no brakes and really loose steering. But it was a wonderful floating living room because you could see the world with the top down. And whenever you see something interesting, you're going slowly enough, you came to a stop and got out, took pictures, and got out your sketchbook and made notes and measured the width of the sidewalk and the distance
Yep.
between the picket fence and the house porch. And I would invite myself in for an iced tea to the houses that are most interesting to me. It was still a
Oh,
period when in
wow.
the South, people were very hospitable and not afraid of axe murderers. And so we really got to see a lot on these trips. Liz and Andreas borrowed the land yacht several times themselves, and Andreas went with Daryl and me, the three of
Yeah.
us in the front seat, just admiring the scenery as we made these trips through old Florida and throughout the Southeast. And
And
then,
how long was your R&D process, Robert, of your adventures in the land yacht as you're accumulating all of this information that eventually is going to find its way into Seaside? Is this a 1 to 3 year period
well,
or
it never stops actually,
okay. Yeah.
but the pre-master planning period was about 3 years,
Okay.
including a 6, 7 month trip to the Mediterranean that Daryl and I took in another kind of land yacht, a Citroën de Chevaux, which
A little
the
smaller.
2CV is much smaller than the Pontiac, but
Yeah.
equally challenged at high speed. So you can only go 45 miles an hour. Flat out, it'll be 65, but you really don't want to be doing that. And but it was very smooth and soft riding at low speeds on bumpy roads. And that's where you wanted to be on these backcountry roads throughout southern France and
Yeah.
Italy. We got as far south in Italy as Paestum and took lots of pictures, made lots of notes, and really began to understand, particularly in south of Rome, the notion of holiday towns and how much programming is essential to
Yeah.
making them work. So we found
Interesting. Yeah.
the town nearest the ruins of Paestum, I think it's called Paestum, is a really ugly town, all built post World War II with these kind of Soviet style high rises, mid
Yeah.
rises. But it was so much fun to be there because the town fathers and mothers had come up with all these activities, puppet shows, parades, a nightly passeggiata, or so, that would was really an event. Uh,
Yeah.
a barge floating in the harbor with a band playing in the barge, fireworks every night. I mean, they just went all out to make this a fun place to be.
Yeah. Wow. Wow.
So we were inspired by that. We were inspired by a much more upscale holiday town, Forte de Marmi, that had pony rides in their park. And the pony rides were a merry-go-round uh, that the kids got on the ponies, and the ponies just walked slowly around in a
Yeah.
circle because they were tethered to this
Yeah.
the center post. Anyway, it was we actually created one of those for Seaside.
That, oh God, I'm starting to see where all this is coming from. This is fabulous.
Yeah.
And so you've come up with all these ideas. You've got the vernacular of the architecture, kind of that you went to the beach. You're reverse engineering all of this. You're seeing what works in various cities. When did you actually start to begin? And did DPZ, did you have a charrette, or was it just you and Andreas and Liz sketching yourselves and here's how we want this community to work? How did the plan come together, and then how did you put the first spade in the earth to begin your first putting your infrastructure and roadways in?
Well, we did do a fair amount of uh, leisurely design work over several years,
Hmm.
uh, up to and including our breaking ground in '81.
Hmm.
We broke ground without a full master plan. We just
Yeah. Hmm.
platted the first of the first street of Seaside, left a fairly big portion to the east of the first street to be sold off as conventional subdivision lots, without any code, without any deed restriction in case this idea didn't take off.
Yeah.
So after we built two houses, we decided we really did need a master plan. And the county attorney, who at the time was our attorney, there was no conflict of interest,
That's convenient.
thinking back in those days,
Quite
said,
complicated. Yeah.
you really ought to do a master plan and grandfather yourself in, because I can predict that it's not going to be as easy to get permits and development orders 10 years, 20 years from now. So we did. And in order to pick up the pace, I suggested to Andreas and Liz that we actually do an on-site meeting that would last the better part of a week and try to make as many decisions as we could during that period of time.
Hmm.
This was a kind of embryonic charrette. It wasn't the full-blown process that DPZ does now with all the engineers and all the county players and everyone else. It's basically just designers trying to come up with uh, a master plan and a code. And the code was what really took us the longest period of time. And it actually evolved over the next couple of years. They took the plan and the code back to Miami and kept working on it at night because we couldn't afford to pay them. We paid Liz and Andreas with a lot. And we paid the night crew, the people, the young people who are still in graduate school, who'd come up for this week and stayed in a Quonset hut near Seaside. It rained
Oh,
all the time. And so they were kind of wet, bedraggled people who came to Seaside every morning and set up drafting tables on our screen porch because there wasn't enough room in the living room, dining room. It's a pretty small house. And they worked on this stuff. Uh, and later we tested the code with an entire first and second year class at Catholic University. All these kids, I think there were over 100 of them, built out Seaside with models, not just plans, uh, at a scale of like 20 ping pong tables. It was huge. And this was done under the supervision of Dhiru Tadani, who was a young faculty member, and his colleague Peter Hetzel. And we learned a lot from what these kids could do because they were all trying to pack every one of their ideas into one house because each of them had a house to build. And we adjusted roof pitches and roof overhangs and building envelopes when we saw how, over the top their buildings were. So we were the code was essentially trying to get them to calm down. But the code also had an initial purpose of allowing carpenters and homeowners and drafting services to design something that would fit, that was a continuation of the local vernacular. So
Yeah.
that reverse engineering allowed us to basically let go of the planning process. Liz and
Wow.
Andreas came up with this idea that they shouldn't design any buildings, they should just do the master plan. And that if we had 200 architects working on 300 lots, we'd get a whole lot more natural heterogeneity and variety than if we just did the whole plan or assigned each group of housing to one architect. So that was,
How long? Yeah, but how long did it take to get all these learning experiences into the code? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Robert,
right.
but I'm
No, no.
just
I
curious
would say
how.
the code was effectively done with the proviso that's right there on the cover page, that it had to be continually refined and updated.
Yeah,
But it was
yeah.
essentially done
Okay,
in 84, 85, which
okay.
was 3 or 4 years after we had broken ground on the
Yeah,
first house.
great.
So,
And then for the houses that you built, the first two that you put in, did they kind of sort of follow this code, or were they did they fit into the vernacular over time as the code evolved, and then you started to implement it with purchasers of lots?
well, the
Or
first two houses were designed by yours truly,
yeah,
with the drafting service drawing up a 2-page set of plans, including
okay,
the specs. I mean, this was
yeah,
really primitive. And I had basically just looked at the houses in Grayton Beach where Daryl and I had lived when we first moved up here, studied them for roof pitches and roof overhangs and the way they were built up off the ground and relation of porch to house, and decided, well, I can do this. This is not rocket science.
yeah,
And so
yeah,
I designed these two houses. One of them was the kind of perfect example of it. Not that it was perfectly designed, but it was a square house with a square two two-story living room in the center and a wraparound porch
yeah,
that, in my uh, made up history for the house, got filled in with kitchen and bathrooms and bedrooms after adults stopped sleeping on the porch, and they wanted indoor plumbing, which was a newfangled idea down here in the 1920s.
yeah,
And an indoor kitchen really depended on much better fireproofing for the cooking equipment
yeah.
because these houses could easily burn down. So most of the early houses we studied in Grayton still had their outdoor kitchens. And so
Wow.
each of our houses actually did have on the back porch an outdoor kitchen because you wanted to obviously barbecue and shuck oysters outdoors.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. So the code comes together. You've got the one street in, you've got a couple of houses. How did the development and build out of Seaside occur the way it does? I love the story you tell about, hey, we're going to build one street, or at least I've heard it from Andreas too. I want to hear your side and on just because in my world, obviously, okay, let's go grade this entire site and let's start putting, you know, putting streets everywhere.
Well,
That is not what happened at Seaside, is my
that is,
understanding.
that is SOP for most developers. They pay too
Yeah.
much attention to their civil engineers. And of course, it's way cheaper per linear foot to do all the streets at
Mhm.
once. We did a post-mortem uh, convocation of DPZ clients about 86, 87. It was organized by a guy named George Ganaris, who had been a DPZ client in southern Alabama.
Mhm.
Uh, and he uh, found, got together several other developers. The first one was in Seaside, and next one was up in north of Birmingham. And we compared notes, what we did well, what we did badly, and everybody else had followed their civil engineer's advice. And what we discovered, because I was too afraid of debt to do
Yeah.
all, take on all
Yeah.
this debt in order to save money to build out the infrastructure, that building one street at a time and having all the housing construction concentrated on that street made it look like something was happening.
Yeah.
We also did some little tricks that our sales folks came up with. We actually invested in picket fences for every lot that had been sold and put a hang tag on the gateway of the fence saying who had bought it.
Yeah.
So, the South is a small place that
Yeah.
with upper
Yeah.
middle class people knowing each other, 6 degrees of separation is probably more like 3 or 4. And so we would, put up John and Mary Smith and the names of their kids and the names of their dogs if we knew.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and so the idea was that people who were prospective buyers would walk them down the street and say, well, something's really happening here.
Yeah.
And we tried to avoid even telling them about the next street over because we didn't know when we were going to do it.
Yeah. So you
So,
had a limited supply
yeah, but
and here's where you can buy. Mhm.
yeah, at any given time in Seaside, we had a limited supply.
Mhm.
We,
And over time, I understand that that created quite a velocity in the price increases of the lots. Is that true?
it did. It was a natural occurrence because we limited supply, but we did something very unnatural and counterintuitive during the next downturn. So we started in 81, which was the tail end of a downturn. It
Yeah.
was when Reagan took office and declared morning in America, but it was a pretty foggy morning at the moment. And then it started, things started taking off, and people in Texas and Louisiana thought they were rich and would start coming over and buying property. And then in the mid to late 80s, I think it was 86, 87, the Texas Louisiana oil boom busted.
Yeah.
Those states are like Florida. It's a boom and bust economy. We're just selling land. They're selling the stuff that comes out of the land. Anyway, when that busted, uh, we had a great benefit that a whole bunch of carpenters who had grown up building and rebuilding plantation houses came over because there was work in and near Seaside.
Yeah.
So our construction quality took a dramatic upswing in just really looking much, much better craftsmanship. The other thing that we figured out, though, was that because we had such a limited supply and because I had avoided a whole lot of debt, we could accelerate sales by having our two salespeople call all the prospects they had seen within the previous year or two and announce a price increase and tell the
Yeah.
sales prospects, if you sign a contract in the next 30 days or 45 days, whatever we gave them,
Yeah.
uh, we will honor the current pricing. So we
And that was
never,
real effective. Yeah.
it was very effective.
Yeah.
We had a big increase in sales during those little periods. Then we had to, sit around for quite a while until the market came back to us because, we were doing this in the middle of a downturn.
Yeah. Yeah.
That concludes part 1 of my conversation with Robert Davies. Come back for part 2 in 2 weeks.
You have been listening to the Land to Lots podcast with Carter Froelich. Follow us wherever you find your podcast to never miss a new episode.